Hello and welcome into another edition of the League Winners Fantasy Show. I'm your host, as always, Dalton Salings, and today it is Wednesday, August 4th. We will be talking about wide receivers. It's all about wide receivers today. Here in a couple minutes, I'm going to dive into my top 12 wide receivers for this season, also a couple other names to keep an eye on. With that being said, there is some news to talk about today concerning the wide receivers. Khalil Shakir, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, has been suffering with an injury. He's been missing practice time right now. I'm not moving him in the rankings yet, but it is something to keep an eye on as the season gets closer. If he's not going, other receivers such as Keon Coleman and even the tight ends, Dalton Kincaid, could get a bump up. Another name to keep an eye on, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. There's conversations right now about whether or not he will receive a 3-game suspension relating to his DUI earlier in the offseason, or actually earlier, but that is to be seen. The Vikings are preparing to be without him for 3 games. If that is the case, obviously he will take a big hit, missing the first 3 games. But as of right now, there has not been anything official from the league, so I am playing as if he is going to be playing all 17 games this season. That should be all in the news. As always, if you have any questions about a news piece I didn't cover, feel free to ask it in the comments. I will get to it in the next video. Without further ado, let's dive into the top 12 wide receivers for this season. The first one shouldn't be surprising at all. I have Jamar Chase, wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he is still the best wide receiver. I think Joe Burrow is going to throw the ball a lot this year. That defense in Cincinnati has a lot of question marks. They're going to be behind in games, have to throw the football. I have him as my leader by almost 1 whole fantasy point per game in the PPR format. I think that he could lead the NFL in targets. I have him leading the NFL in receptions and receiving touchdowns this season. Not the most yards, but I do think he's going to get the ball a lot. He's going to score a lot of touchdowns. I think it really separates him from everyone else. It's the catches and the touchdowns. It'll put him ahead above everyone else. Of my top 3 wide receivers, he has the most consistent quarterback play in Joe Burrow if healthy. I don't think there's a lot to talk about with Jamar Chase. I think he's the best wide receiver. I think if you took him in the 101, that's a very fair pick. I think he should be going in the top 2 picks of fantasy drafts. That's about all I can say about him. My wide receiver 2 is Justin Jefferson. A guy I took in our mock draft video just a little bit ago. I grabbed Justin Jefferson. There is a little bit of concern, multiple reasons. One is the J.J. McCarthy effect. Does the new quarterback impact him? I think he's good enough that it doesn't. I don't think it matters who's throwing the football. He's going to get the ball. I have him leading the NFL in receiving yards this season. I think he's going to get the ball a lot and just kind of be forced to create with it. Maybe a few more short yardage options. But I do think he gets the ball a lot and is going to create with that. I have him for 1,600 yards this year. The other question is hamstring. He is dealing with a hamstring injury right now. I don't think I need to see him ramp up in training camp. I trust Justin Jefferson. He's a pro's pro. I think he's going to be fine when the season rolls around. I'm not worried about either of those 2 things this year. I expect him to have a great year. I have him as my wide receiver 2. And my wide receiver 3 could differ from some people. I have Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Coming back, CJ Stroud, I expect a little bit of a bounce back this year. I've talked about him a lot. I expect him to be able to bounce back a little bit this year, and Nico Collins to be the big beneficiary of that. No Tank Dell this year because of an injury. No Stephon Diggs. He's now in New England. I think Nico Collins is a clear one on this team. I've been out on Nico Collins for a few years and been wrong. This year I'm getting on the other side of that. I have him as my wide receiver 3. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 7 right now. So he's going off the board at the back of the first round. Now, my gap between him and our next really 2 guys is not a huge gap. If you're a believer in, and I'll just go ahead and spoil the wide receiver 4, CeeDee Lamb, I am not mad at taking CeeDee Lamb above Nico Collins. In a draft, I would probably take CeeDee Lamb above Nico Collins, but I am more than happy to end up with Nico Collins, who I project to finish the season as the wide receiver 3. Have him for about over 1,400 yards, over 100 catches, and 8 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb, on the other hand, with Dak Prescott, a new wide receiver 2 in town, and George Pickens, I think takes a little bit of his work. I still think he's able to have a very dominant season. I have him as the lowest target guy of these top 4 wide receivers, only 146 targets. But another receiver that I have going for 100 catches this year. I think he could have a very strong year. I have him just behind Nico Collins because of the yardage. I think Lamb could get the ball, potentially have more catches than Collins does, but I don't think he's going to go for as many yards per catch as Nico Collins will go for. Stroud will push that ball downfield, and Nico Collins is the big play threat, whereas the Cowboys have George Pickens as that bigger play threat. And so I think potentially Nico Collins could outscore CeeDee Lamb. Drafting those guys in either order, though, I don't think there's a wrong answer when it comes to those 2 guys. CeeDee Lamb is being drafted as wide receiver 3. Drafting CeeDee Lamb as wide receiver 3 is not a bad choice in the slightest. My wide receiver 5 is actually the wide receiver 11 off the board, going in the back of the second round. I like Ladd McConkey a lot. The Chargers wide receiver is a very good football player. He gets open. Justin Herbert trusts him already. There was a little bit, and I'll be honest, I reacted a little bit to the Hall of Fame game, moving Ladd McConkey up just a bit. I didn't love what I saw from Trey Harris. I think McConkey is head and shoulders above whoever the wide receiver 2 ends up being on this team. For that reason, I have him as my wide receiver 5, just getting a lot of work, getting the ball thrown his direction, scoring some touchdowns, 1,300 yards on over 100 catches. I think he has a very strong season. I think it's a very consistent season as well. I don't think you're going to see a lot of boom and bust out of Ladd McConkey. I think it's going to be a lot more balanced, and you're just going to get good, consistent work out of Ladd McConkey every week, scoring potentially about 17 fantasy points a week for you, probably about 15 a week. If he gets in the end zone, he gets you 20. And I think that's kind of what you're going to see from Ladd McConkey, and that consistency is a very strong thing. He's a guy in the second round that I like a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up with him in a lot of my drafts if I'm in the right spot for him. Of course, I'm not going to reach in the first round for Ladd McConkey, I don't think, but he's currently tied for my most drafted wide receiver in best ball drafts. I have him on half my best ball teams. He's a guy I love drafting because I think he's a very strong player. With that being said, my wide receiver 6 is Malik Nabers of my New York Giants. This is almost a volume thing. The camp reports look phenomenal. No one can guard him in camp. What that says about the Giants secondary is one thing, but Russell Wilson is looking his way. He's getting better quarterback play this year than he did last year, and he had a great season last year. I have him ahead of Brian Thomas Jr., and I'm going to bring that name up right now too. Both second-year wide receivers. A lot of people have Brian Thomas Jr., my apologies, ahead of Malik Nabers. I have Nabers ahead. Nabers is being drafted ahead. I have Nabers right at his ADP, whereas I have Thomas one spot ahead of his ADP. So I think I would prefer to have Malik Nabers because I think he's going to have more catches. I will give it to him. Brian Thomas is the big play guy. I'm for about 14.5 yards a catch, Brian Thomas. But I think Nabers just gets the ball so much. He's my last guy with 100 catches on the season. I think he gets the ball a lot. He gets it thrown his way often, and he's going to have a big season off of that. I'm not sure if there's a guy that can cover him. And if Russell Wilson is playing the whole year, or even if it goes to Jameis Winston, Malik Nabers will have a huge year because of that at my wide receiver 6. Wide receiver 7, I've talked a little bit about Brian Thomas. I don't think Travis Hunter cuts too much into his workload. I think Travis Hunter is going to play a lot of defense as well, potentially losing a couple touchdowns, Brian Thomas, from what he could have had. But I do expect a lot of catches. I'm for 93 catches, 1,300 yards, and some touchdowns. I think he's a very strong player, being drafted at the start of the second round. I think that's a good pick you can make and feel strongly. There are a lot of good wide receivers at the top of the draft. Really, the top 7 guys here, really 8 guys, are good wide receivers that you can get at the top of your draft. You can get 2 of, and you can really lock down your wide receiver position early. Similar to what I tried to do in our mock draft. You can definitely take advantage of that and get your receiver position locked in early and then attack the running backs later in the draft. That doesn't mean there's going to be great running backs there, but you can definitely get 2 top 12 wide receivers because of where they're going and feel strongly in that position to not really have to worry about it later in your draft. With that being said, there is a lot of depth at wide receiver. In the PPR format, I have 64 different wide receivers projected for 7 or more fantasy points this year. That's a lot of guys. Some of these guys are going very late in drafts. You can find them and get values on them. I think it'll be very interesting to see the strategies as drafts get closer because there's 2 ways to go about it. You can attack those top guys and get a 17-point per game score in Ladd McConkey, or you can wait and get a lot more of those dart throws and potentially have boom weeks. I think in the best ball format, it might even be smarter to take those risks. But in a redraft traditional league, getting those strong wide receivers, especially with less volatility at the wide receiver position than what we see at running back, can be a very strong strategy because the running backs, you can get injured a little bit more often, lose work. Wide receivers, you're not going to see that as much with the elite guys, and so I think it is a little bit safer this year to be targeting those wide receivers early. With that being said, I'm probably still taking Bijan Robinson at the 101, but it is definitely something to keep an eye on. My wide receiver 8, the last guy I talked about being in that range of top wide receivers, is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 4. I have him a little bit lower, and my reasoning for that is because of the Lions offense. I've talked about it a lot on this show. I don't have a ton of confidence in what they're going to roll out without Ben Johnson in terms of play calling and in terms of pace. I think the pace is going to slow down, which will just get Amon-Ra a little bit less work. I have him just under 100 catches and 1,100 yards and 9 scores. Still a very strong season, but he's being drafted at the 6th overall pick. The wide receiver 4 off the board. That is too rich for my blood. I like Brian Thomas, Malik Nabers, Ladd McConkey. I like all those guys over him. Even CeeDee Lamb's going behind him, Nico Collins. All those guys I like over Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's a guy I won't be drafting very much of just because of the cost. I think he will have a wide receiver 1 season. I think he'll be very good this year. It's just too rich for my blood to try and draft Amon-Ra St. Brown in the top 6 picks. I think there's too many other guys that I would prefer to have that I would draft straight up over him. Not even to say, oh, I'm going to draft a different position. Wide receivers, I would legitimately draft over him going much later. My wide receiver 9 is T. Higgins. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 14, so there's a little bit of a jump for him. I like T. Higgins a lot of the same reason I like Jamar Chase. These guys can't get double teamed because they have each other on the opposite side. I think T. Higgins takes advantage this year of a lot of the coverage Jamar Chase will get, especially if he starts off as hot as I expect him to. I think Joe Burrow is a huge winner in fantasy because of these guys. I think a stack between T. Higgins and Joe Burrow, or Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, is a great strategy in drafts this year. But I have T. Higgins for just under 15 fantasy points a game, 1,100 yards, 9 scores, a lot of touchdowns. I think that the Bengals are going to have have to throw the ball a lot. I talked about Jamar Chase. They're going to have to throw the ball. They're going to be behind in games. Both of these guys are going to be beneficiaries of that. I think they could very logistically have 2 top 12 wide receivers this year. My wide receiver 10 is Puka Nacua. Now, there are a lot of reports right now about Matthew Stafford. Just another piece of news here. Matthew Stafford has been suffering from an injury. He's not been in camp. It's getting a little worrisome. Also, Devontae Adams was brought in at wide receiver. A lot of those questions are why he's as low as I have him at wide receiver 10. He's being drafted right now as wide receiver 5. But with that being said, I think it doesn't matter who's throwing the ball. Not as much as Justin Jefferson, but I think Puka Nacua will get open regardless of who's throwing him the football, and he's going to put in work regardless of who's getting the ball. I have him at my 10. I'm not going to be drafting him at his draft price at the 9th pick. First round pick, I'm not going to be using on Puka Nacua right now. But with that being said, I think he is going to be a top 12 wide receiver at the end of the year. And if it comes out that Stafford isn't going to be able to play at the start of the year and that draft cost comes down, Puka is absolutely a guy I will be looking at because I think the talent is there, and I don't think the quarterback play will be able to hold him back really at all. My wide receiver 11, Super Bowl champion, A.J. Brown. He's coming off the Super Bowl win. I have him for 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. The risk with A.J. Brown is he's not going to have as many catches. I have him for really the fewest catches of my top 12 with only 77 receptions. So I think that is a bit of a risk. He's being drafted right now as the wide receiver 10. I have him 1 spot behind. That's not a big deal at all. I do think he's a name to keep an eye on. He's a wide receiver 1. A guy that I think is being really underrated is his teammate, Devonta Smith. And I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about Devonta Smith because he's a guy I feel like I keep seeing in drafts in comfortable spots where I'm taking him, or places I'd be comfortable taking him. I took him in our mock draft. I have him really actually 1 spot behind his ADP, but just because of the guys around him, I feel a lot more confident drafting a guy like Devonta Smith than a lot of the other guys going in that area. I think that they're both going to be very productive, both the Eagles receivers, that is, and I expect, in all honesty, to be able to find just better value from Devonta Smith than you would be getting from somebody else. And for that reason, I've been drafting him a lot. I like him also more than some of the names I have statted around him. Like a Calvin Ridley, I like Devonta Smith more. A Rashee Rice, I like Devonta Smith more. Even a DJ Moore is a guy I might be taking a Devonta Smith over. And so even though the draft price is about where I have him ranked, Devonta Smith is a name I find myself continually drafting and a guy I'm looking at as a bit of a sleeper this year, even as I have him statted right around his ADP. My last name in my top 12 is Jackson Smith-Njigba, JSN, the Seahawks wide receiver. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are both gone. Cooper Kupp was brought in, but is a little bit older. New quarterback with Sam Darnold. I think this all plays in JSN's favor. I have him for just 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, but with 97 catches, I think he just gets the ball a lot. I think Sam Darnold is going to find him as his favorite target and get him the ball a lot of times. I have him for 137 targets. I think he gets it often. Is getting the ball in his hands and can do a little bit of work. I like him in the Seahawks offense as the number 1 option. There's a lot of questions in the running game about the health of Ken Walker. What can Zach Charbonnet do? I think Sam Darnold's proven he can get fantasy relevant wide receivers, and he can do 2 of them. And so I think for that reason, JSN can be a wide receiver 1, and I have him statted as a wide receiver 1. He's being drafted also as the wide receiver 1. One of the biggest values, actually, I'll move on to my wide receiver 13 here just to talk about a couple of values. DK Metcalf, I have 9 spots ahead of ADP. He's being drafted as a wide receiver 22. I have him as the wide receiver 13. In the Steelers offense with Aaron Rodgers, he's the wide receiver. They don't have a wide receiver 2 right now. If they bring somebody in, this ranking will change. But as of right now, they don't have really a true second wide receiver on the roster. DK Metcalf is the one. He's the guy who's going to get a ton of work this year. Have 128 targets, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns. I just think he's going to get the ball a lot. He's going to be a touchdown threat with Aaron Rodgers, and I expect a big season from him. That's why I have him so far ahead of ADP. Another guy I have ahead of ADP is Jerry Jeudy. Browns wide receiver 1. Of course, there are so many questions with what the quarterback situation looks like. I think that is so devalued Jerry Jeudy. He is being drafted as a wide receiver 35 off the board right now. I have him as my wide receiver 17. I am that confident in him this year. I think the talent is going to shine through whatever quarterback play is going to be there. I think they're going to look Judy's way a lot, and he could be a big winner and a big a big fantasy winner just because of the fact he's being drafted so late right now. He could be a guy at the end of the year looking back on, like, I'm so glad I drafted Jerry Jeudy, especially as your wide receiver 2 or even your wide receiver 3 where you can get him. That is elite value for a guy that's a clear one on his team and is going to get the ball a lot from potentially an inexperienced quarterback. I want to brush on Terry McLaurin here. Contract is still up in the air. I haven't moved him in my rankings. Neither have I moved Deebo Samuel. I expect him to work out the contract, and he'll be back on the field. Him and Jane Daniels have already worked on a connection last year. I don't think he's going to be missing much by missing this portion of camp right now. With that being said, it is something to keep an eye on, and it will obviously impact my rankings. A player I have really kind of seeming overvalued this year is a Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 18. I have him as the wide receiver 26. I just think that there's so many weapons there. And of course, there's all the question marks with Chris Godwin. But I have Baker Mayfield taking a step back this year. And I think there's too many weapons in this Buccaneer offense for him to reach 1,000 yards. I have him for only 914 yards and 7 touchdowns. A fine season, but I just don't trust his health. And I don't trust the offense to be as productive as it has been. I think Baker comes back on his touchdowns a little bit this year. And I think that the throwing comes back. They lean on Bucky Irving maybe a little bit more this year. For that reason, I'm kind of out on Mike Evans this year. Going in the 4th round, not a pick I'm going to be making. I have him behind guys like, I have him just behind Devonta Smith. And even probably going to be taking shots on guys like maybe Jamison Williams or Zay Flowers over on Mike Evans, just to name a few names. But that concludes my wide receiver takes. We're going to have a draft strategy video coming out later this week and potentially a special episode as well, as we are going to be slowing down releases as classes kind of get ramping back up in school. So thank you very much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.